And we are back with more Road Gang Radio, live on iHeart, YouTube, Radio Nemo, and beyond. Jimmy and Lindsay, let's keep it rolling.
Before I turn it over to Lindsay to give her a chance to introduce her wonderful friend and his wonderful book, Marshall Platter actually made me laugh out loud. The best thing that ever came out of Dallas is the I-35. Laugh my ass off. How about them cowgirls?
And Lindsay Lawler.
Yeah, there's also that. There's also that. But that's the best thing to come out of Red River. I would say that's the Red River transplant. There you go. How about that? Everything works out in the end, especially when you have a terrific neighbor who's also a genius. Go on.
Oh, my God. Okay, I'm going to introduce him, say hello, and then tell you about why he's the best neighbor in the world. But, guys, do we have a Lee on the phone?
We do. Give me 1 second.
Hey, Lee. Good morning to you. Welcome to the show. What is happening? What is going on? Hey, Lee. Good morning.
Hey, good morning.
Hi, Fred. Okay, so I'm just making sure you're there so you can hear me because I'm going to dote on you. But first, before we go into me doting you on as a neighbor, guys, so excited to welcome to the show my across the street neighbor. Literally, I can see him out my windows. I do look creepily in your windows sometimes. Actually, they do have a telescope, so I should be careful. He is one of the best humans you'll ever meet. When I'll tell you about what happened when we moved to the neighborhood. But he's not just a great neighbor. He's a powerhouse of insight, guys. He's a U.S. Army vet. He's a former Ross Perot campaign staffer, a digital marketing guru, and now a newly minted author, which is such a huge accomplishment. I got to hold the book in my hands this morning as he delivered it to me with a smile, a wink and a smile. His new book is called Never Outmatched: Military Strategies to Lead, Innovate, and Win in the Modern Marketing Battlefield. It is all about taking battlefield, Jim, this is so up your alley, taking battlefield tested strategies and applying them to leadership, marketing, and innovation. So cool. We could use this in our business, but we're going to dig even deeper into how this applies to you guys, to our listeners, to the truck driving community, or anybody listening on the corporate side, because especially if you're an owner operator, you are the brand, you are the business. And Lee's got some gold here on how to scale, how to stand out, and how to survive in the modern marketing world, which is truly just completely bewilders me all the time. So please make welcome to the show my neighbor, my friend, and now yours, Lee Pepper. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you so much.
Lee, I wanted to kind of begin.
Wait! I got to tell you about him being my neighbor.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I heard the other through him looking through the window. I thought that was it. My apologies. Go on.
No, I know you're excited. No, but Jim, here's what's so cool. When we first moved in, he already knew. We have a mutual friend, and she had already said, "Oh my gosh, you've got these people that are moving across the street from you guys. I can't wait for you to connect." So, Jim, when we arrived at our house, Lee, and his wife Jennifer had already showed up and brought coffee and wine and cookies, and it was like, and then a couple other neighbors did the same, and I'm like, I think I remember telling you this, Jim. I was like, I didn't think that still happened where neighbors did that, and they showed up with coffee and teas and welcome to the neighborhood, and then people bringing bread and plants. I was like, oh, this still exists. And Lee is the neighbor that is the first to text when the power's out in the neighborhood, the first to text when a tree goes down, and check in on everybody. We'll call him the nosy neighbor, but in the best kind of way. Lee, does that track with you?
Yes, absolutely. Well, I certainly. Jennifer and I have always done that wherever we lived, and I hear that from so many people that doesn't go on in my neighborhood. And I said, well, you can be the change. You just got to go do it. And I think we have a great community that still continues to live those kind of values, which I really appreciate.
What a good point. You'd be like, oh, this never happens in my neighborhood. Well, then start it, dummy. What a great point. Yes. It's not that hard. That's funny.
Yeah, Lee, I have to tell you, the idea of taking action, which is, by the way, perfectly suited for the book that we're going to be talking about today, the idea of, people about being the change they want to see in the world. That's an easier kind of thing said than it is done, because it really is about, the principle, the objective. I kind of work that in there, by the way, because so many lessons that I have learned in my life, with a father in the military and a big, big student of history, I can't tell you the number of times that I have I had to study the Battle of Midway in depth for a whole bunch of reasons. And the number of things I have learned about how to take chances and how to delegate authority that have come from that battle have really kind of impressed upon me. This book opens up with the Kasserine Pass disaster and then Patton kind of moving in to take command after that. Can you kind of talk about the idea of when you decided to not so much have these insights, because those are that come from your understanding of military history, but when you kind of said, you know what, I'm realizing there are a lot of parallels between military actions and military decisions and business and marketing decisions, when did you decide that this actually would be a subject of a great book, and how did you go about structuring it?
Yeah, I think it goes back to 2010. I had started working at a company called Foundations Recovery Network here in Nashville. We created and owned a number of drug and alcohol treatment centers around the country, and we were just starting to get some success in growing, our company and offering our dual diagnosis treatment around the country. And our private equity sponsors invited me to come to Chicago to present because they wanted to know what are these folks in Nashville doing to grow their business through digital marketing. So during that you're creating that presentation, I started referencing Karl von Clausewitz, who was a Prussian general, from the 18th century. And his whole military strategy was force multiplication, which is what I applied. I learned about it in armor school back in Fort Knox in the early 90s, and I applied it to my methodology of how we had very small budget, but how we were going to create these different assets and then force multiply them across all these platforms. And the audience really loved it. Our partners loved it. And so that kind of led me down the path of, there's a lot of things I learned in the military that I think are appropriate to business. And that's kind of where I just dived into it.
Well, and so strategy to me here is a big thing. We're going to talk about, Lee, that a lot of our audience, of course, are over-the-road truck drivers, and we'll talk about how this pertains to them. But for, you've done everything from Ross Perot's campaign to $350 million business deals and everything in between. So the power of strategy in motion. I mean, I think there's so many times I could say, even with what we've done, launching this new radio platform we're doing, I'm not going to say we didn't have a strategy, Jim, but it comes down to sometimes when there's that moment where you figure out, okay, am I doing this for desperation, or because I'm really wanting to scale up and go the long haul here? And I think the desperation is when we make these kind of lateral quick moves that can't sustain. But when you're in it for the long haul, trucking pun intended, then we really get behind the strategy. So as it pertains to, really strategy in motion with your personal brand, especially for blue collar entrepreneurs, what's maybe the simplest battlefield strategy they could use daily? A trucker gets into his truck, a daily strategy for the long haul.
Well, here's what I would say, Lindsay. I think this is very appropriate to what you and Jimmy are doing there, is that the worst decision that you can make in life and in business is no decision. Indecision is what on the battlefield will get you killed or hurt or overrun. So it's that status quo mentality that hurts so many individuals and so many businesses. So, in the military, it was drilled into us. My first week in armor school, we're learning how to drive and command an M1 Abrams, and the sergeants are sitting, on top of the tank. They're actually sitting in welded chairs on top of the tank, and they're yelling at us. They're counting down. What are you going to do now, Lieutenant? And they're counting down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Whoa.
And the whole purpose is they're not trying to necessarily get us to make the best decision. They're trying to get us to make a decision. Go left, go right, go backwards, go forwards. That's what they were trying to drill into us, that just sitting still will get you hurt. And so I think in business, I have never been afraid to take some risk. Now, I'm doing it within, budgetary, within good compliance, but I always wanted to take some risk. I always wanted to experiment. And then if something didn't work, okay, I know we won't do that again. And I think that's where we in our individual brands, and certainly thinking about, your listeners in the trucking industry, don't be afraid to dip your toe in the water and to start experimenting and looking at some things you could do in marketing. Not doing anything, you definitely will not win.
Well, no, that's huge, Jim. That actually really landed, even for me personally, thinking about even just as a homeowner, because Seamus and I were talking, Lee, as you know, we're doing some work over here, and we think about all the things we want to do to our house, but we've been for a long time like, oh, well, let's not do that because we know that one day we want to do an addition. And it's like, no, we got to start making moves, because we could, what if ourselves out, to never do anything. And same comes down to a lot of times we fix things on our house when we're selling it. And it's like, why didn't we do that so we could enjoy it? And so I think just overall that message of the worst decision is no decision, like go fall on your face, but at least you tried, and then you try again. So I think that was a big one, Jim, that lands for us personally and professionally.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say, Lee, the idea that we were talking with another friend of ours who's a small business owner, and he was making the joke. He said that the bad way to run a small business was all these really kind of lowercase c conservative measures, and he went through all these real kind of long details. And he said the best way to run a small business is gamble, 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 and it's almost
Hmm.
in some ways, like I said, reading the book made me think of other examples. One of the great joys of reading Never Outmatched was it wasn't just me going, "Oh, that's a terrific example." Whether we were talking about the overextension of the Roman supply lines, or whether we were digging in, as I said in the beginning of the Kasserine Pass. I want you guys to dig into this. I just kept thinking about as I read this book the number of examples, and the reason why I think the military analogy is so darn good is that it is such a dramatic example of it, and that it reminds you you've got to take bold risk, because in those situations people's lives are on the line. But then I was reminded in reading the book, when you're actually working with people in a small business or a growing business, their lives are on the line. Their wherewithal and their means and their futures and their imaginations and the dreams, and all of that stuff. If you don't get it right, if you don't do what you're supposed to do and really take the gamble, you're costing people everything. So you need to honor that by being bold, right?
No, absolutely. And you think about it for the small, well, for any business owner, a lot of it comes down to it's our money. And so you're just sitting there, and it's still costing you. And the Kasserine Pass is a great example, Jim, because when Major General Friedenhall, when that battle was lost, and they went back and did the analysis, he was in a fortified bunker many miles away. He was not on the front lines, and I see that in business where people they lead from behind a spreadsheet. They're not getting out there. And so when Eisenhower put Patton in charge, I mean, within 90 days, we had ousted the Nazis from North Africa. There was a time when I was hired for a company, and I got there, and the CEO said, "Now, Lee, we're happy to have you, but we don't want you making any changes the first 90 days. We just want you to kind of come in and learn the business." And I'm like, "No, that's not what I do," and that's not what Patton did. If Patton had done that, we'd still be fighting the Nazis. I mean, sometimes you have to go in, and you can't let status quo slow you down.
I kept also thinking, by the way, and you'll dig this too, I kept thinking about the Incheon invasion in Korea. I don't know if people know that full story, but the idea of being pushed back to they had so little ground left, Lindsay, that the UN forces in Korea literally were down to the Pusan Peninsula. They had no space left. And so MacArthur looked at a map and said, what is the absolute worst place to land? Where would it be an absolute disaster to put an amphibious assault? Where would be the last place that a sane human being would ever put troops on the ground? And MacArthur looked at Incheon and said, that would be the place, and that's why we're going to land right there. And I kept thinking about the idea of finding a place that nobody would ever. This is what the book did for me, Lindsay. I started thinking about every major battle that I've kind of studied and began trying to apply it to business lessons. That's really
exactly
the other
what the book is, and that's why it's so brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, you really wanted to spark that kind of conversation, and also I think encourage people to learn more about history and apply those lessons to the now, right?
No, absolutely. And I think that and today I volunteer with our local county's Veterans Treatment Court, and it's an alternative sentencing program for veterans that get into minor scrapes with the law, so to speak. And a lot of what I've learned over the last 7-8 years volunteering there is that we do a great job getting into the military. Like I enlisted, everything was great, but we don't do a great job with our soldiers when they're getting out of the military. And I think that this book also serves as a bridge to where people who have served or have family members that have served, where they can start to think about, oh, I learned some really interesting stuff, and here's how I can translate that and correlate that into my personal life, into my business life, which I think I'm proud about that book, that people will read that and say, oh, I see how that could translate into business, so to speak.
Well, you should be proud of the book, because what's really beautiful about it, Lee, on so many levels, is the fact that you're taking your expertise, your work, your experiences, and so your passion, so to speak, and then putting it out there so other people can also thrive. And I think that's where that's the best places in the world, where it's something that lights us up, and then you're able to help transfer it to other people. And you do that a lot, as you mentioned, with your work with veterans and the outreach programs. But here's what's really interesting to me, Lee, especially from a marketing perspective. You've worked in the behavioral health world. You launched the treatment centers and social movements like Heroes in Recovery. Mental health is such a big thing that I love to talk about, especially as it pertains to the truck drivers who spend so much time alone. And so, especially with long hours and isolation. So how does your work and you think how does knowing that your work with veterans and the behavioral health side help you to think about marketing with heart, I guess I'll call it?
Yeah, I think that's really important because we all have passions, and I think that would be really fascinating for your listeners because when you're on a long haul and you've got many hours alone, I mean, take advantage of that opportunity to kind of think about, wow, this is what I may want to drive towards as far as my passions, and don't be afraid to document some of these ideas. And that's some of the things I write about in the book is that a lot of times we really fear like writing down some of these just great ideas we have. And I wonder, Lindsay, if you find that like with writing and music too, like it doesn't have to be perfect, and don't let perfect be the enemy of good. And I think that would be something that I would encourage all listeners to just take that opportunity, whether it's a voice memo or a voice note on your phone or just a little chicken scratch on a notepad, because those things are going to turn into something when you can actually spend a few minutes, thinking about it into maybe your one big great idea.
Would you call this book right now your new? By the way, we're talking with Lee Pepper. His book, Never Outmatched. You can go to neveroutmatchedbook.com to pre-order it now. I highly suggest you do, everybody listening. Not just because he's my neighbor and I love him and I hope he's going to continue to bring me coffee and wine if he sells a lot of books, but because I actually think it's a great book that pertains to our lives. But would you call this book kind of your greatest work, Lee, so far, that everything's led to it? Finishing a book, I don't know what's harder, military training or finishing a book. They're hard in such different ways from an accomplishment standpoint. Is this your greatest work so far?
I'll tell you what the hardest is raising those two boys that Lindsay, Miles, and Cy.
Yeah, I figured that was coming. And sending and having one of them somewhat follow in your footsteps here, right?
Yeah, my youngest son, Cy, he enlisted over the summer. He is now in basic training at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. So he signed up for active duty service, so he'll be serving for the next 4 years, and we're super proud of him. And he's on his journey. We did get to talk to him Sunday, so Jennifer is over the panic stage, that all moms go through when their sons or daughters go off to the military. So yeah, but thank you so much for mentioning that. I think that one of the things that I wanted to point out in the book that I think is really super helpful for people is this idea of wargaming. And, this is something that I wonder, like, for your audience, a lot of times when you're coming up with these great ideas, like, you should actually practice, like, wargaming it out. Like, what are all the scenarios where it could go wrong or it could go well? And actually take the time to kind of just document it. It doesn't have to be perfect, but just to document it, because I think a lot of times we have these wonderful ideas, but then we're not sure what the next step is. And wargaming can be one of those bridges to where you can actually kind of play it out. And then it kind of would help give you either that pause to say, well, let me keep working on it, or it might be that influence to say, yeah, let's go do this.
I just want to kind of make you feel really good because my next question actually began with a quote from the book saying, "Growing up in the 1980s, I was exposed to the best movies of all time." I actually wanted to kind of pivot.
Pivot?
I wanted to pivot into the chapter that you actually talked about, the movie War Games in particular. And Lindsay knows this from having worked with me, where I say, I'll often tell her stuff like, let me tell you what I think they're up to. When I see, I don't want to say competitor, but when I see other people kind of working on stuff, and Lindsay talks about the strategies that people often engage in to further their PR, and we will often say, here's what we think they're up to. And I was going to ask you the idea that you really think people should sit down, because I do it, and write out what they think their competitors are doing, what it is you can do to respond to that, but also what it is you can do to kind of not ignore your competitors, but to act in your own way, to be proactive as opposed to reactive, correct?
Absolutely. And, we all have these wonderful, machines now that are in our pockets, but, you can even just use a Word document And when you see something that a competitor's doing, like you can document like what you saw them do, whether it was on one of the platforms, like Instagram or TikTok or YouTube. Like you should just write down, it's just a sentence or two. You're not trying to write, a book or a thesis, but you just start to document these things. And you'll find that, pretty soon you'll have a nice list, and that will start to allow you to decide what's important. I've been doing a lot of testing on TikTok recently because the publisher wanted me to make sure that I was, taking advantage of all the
Are you doing
platforms.
dances?
And
Are you doing dances on TikTok too? Oh,
what's funny is I'm not doing dances, but it has been a really fascinating example of what I actually apply, because I started posting interviews that I've done over the years, some older content, repurposing it. And it has been fascinating to see what resonates. And I think that that's important to document that, because a lot of people jump from tactic to tactic to tactic, and they wonder why nothing ever sticks. And it's because they lack the strategy. And so writing things down will help you kind of move from the tactics into the strategy, and you can actually then decide, is this worth my effort, worth my time? And I think it will help you make better decisions, because you can't just follow everybody just because everybody else is doing it. Like, you need to have a little bit of documentation to understand that cost.
yeah, but Lee, what do you say to when you're talking about the war room and writing everything down? Like, here's everything that could go wrong. What do you say to someone, Pollyanna, like me, who's like, I don't want to think about the negatives. I only want to focus on the positive. And those people who get sort of who live in that fear, like, I'm not going to do, because you can say it because you're leading by example and you've done it. But for the people out there listening that were like, oh my gosh, if I write everything down, I'm not going to do anything. If everything down that could go wrong, I'm going to live in the fear that anything go wrong and do nothing. How do you curb that?
Yeah, I think I think you have to understand that this is not going to take weeks or months to do. This is a few minutes at a time.
Gotcha.
It's in bite-sized chunks, because if you do, you can get, what do they call that? Paralysis by analysis.
Analysis paralysis, yeah.
Yes, and that's not what we're talking about. And you can imagine in the military scenario, you don't have a lot of time. And so that was the whole, purpose of how they were counting down and yelling at us to make a decision. And so it can be quick, and it doesn't have to be perfect. And probably what you're going to approach is going to be good, and that can go a very long way.
Gotcha.
By the way, and that goes back to one of the other people you use as an example, Dwight Eisenhower's great line, in preparing for battle, I've always found that plans are useless, but planning is indispensable. And that seems to kind of percolate through the book, to understand that you do have counterparties sometimes acting against you, and that events on the ground you can't predict, but you can make sure that all of your ducks are in a row, correct? That what you're also doing is indemnifying yourself, that you're actually planning for contingencies while keeping the principle of the objective in front of you, correct, sir?
Absolutely. And again, I can't state it enough, like, this is not supposed to be some type of academic exercise that takes, weeks and months to do. Like, these are things that can be done, fairly quickly. I mean, we used to use, back in the early 90s at Fort Knox, we were using sand tables. I mean, today you've got all sorts of wonderful tools that help you do this, but we were actually doing our wargaming on old-timey sand tables, kind of like what von Clausewitz was doing, back 200 years ago. And so you just have to commit mentally that no matter what, you're going to determine to yourself that you're not going to be outmatched. And that's where in the military, and I think in business, is super important, because you can have a plan, but then what happens if you lose communication? What happens if the weather turns bad? I can imagine, for your listeners, what happens if there's construction that you didn't know about, or what happens if there's a strike, at the ports? And I mean, you don't want to get paralyzed by this, but you need to know and practice through this wargaming exercise what you would do, so that when it does happen, now you can make a more educated decision, and it'll be in real time and be faster, instead of being like, oh my gosh, I got paralyzed because this hit me and now I'm stuck for a week.
We're talking with Lee Pepper. The book is Never Outmatched: Military Strategies to Lead, Innovate, and Win in the Modern Marketing Battlefield. You can go to neveroutmatchedbook.com to pre-order now. It comes out in just a couple weeks, but you're going to want to go ahead and order so it shows up the minute it comes out at your house. Lee, what is something because with all your success, you're still human. You still obviously yourself get overwhelmed. And, the book is called Never Outmatched, but we all feel outmatched at some point. What do you personally, Lee Pepper, do when you are feeling overwhelmed or, outrun by what's ahead?
Well, I think that I always relate back to that, we're fortunate, in our world right now in business that we're not in a situation where, for the most part, you could be, injured or killed. And that's where I think about, especially with my son, going into the military, like they're in a lot tougher situation. So I always recognize that, we do have a lot of people's, their careers in our hands, or maybe our families, as we're trying to build, our businesses. But I always think back to, listen, this is an opportunity that we can seize. And I don't get panicked because I'm like, at the end of the day, I still have a roof over my head, I still have food on the table. And so I think that that tends to relax me a little bit more. And I do not get afraid of something not working. There's been plenty of things that I've done in my life, in my career, that didn't work. I just acknowledge that didn't work. So now we're going to move on to the next thing. And I think that that's a really important practice to do. It's like you don't want to forget about it, but you just want to acknowledge it and then just move right on.
Jim, my shoulders literally while Lee was just talking, my shoulders went down. I mean, it's such a reminder that the worst case scenario is not our scenario. Thank you, God, for that. And so everybody just calm down. We're all okay. Everybody calm down, Jim.
Yeah,
right?
everybody needs to be calm, cool, and collected. The other thing is the fact that one of my favorite quotes from another Lee Child's great creation of Jack Reacher said, "Rather than focusing about what went wrong, let's talk about how to get it right next time." There are so many great lessons in this book, Lee. I can't thank you enough for making the time for us this morning. You got any big plans for the day? I mean, what are you going to do with all the wonderful stuff in your life going on?
Well, there's a lot of promotion right now, so I appreciate the opportunity to be on with you all, and I'm proud to be one of your early interviewers as you guys are embarking on this new creative endeavor. I really like what you guys are doing with Radio Nemo, and I love what you guys are doing, broadcasting across the internet. I think that that's the future, and I'm really excited for you all. But yeah, I've got a number of podcast interviews, and then I've got a call with my publisher later on. And then I will probably go home and mow the yard before Seamus starts texting me if I have died and why haven't I mowed my grass.
Well, you know what? We'll come over and catcall at you while you're out there mowing your lawn later today. I'll put my
Lindsay,
lawn chair out, crack a beer, and whistle at you.
I don't know if you can tell that story. Can I tell that quick story?
Sure.
So yesterday I was walking down my driveway, Jim, and I saw a man at the top of their driveway, and they were like moving some boards or something around. I thought it was Seamus, so I started catcalling him. And I did it 3 or 4 times, and the person didn't turn around. And then I realized that, that's not Seamus. So I was whistling at some stranger to me, but some personal friend, and luckily they had the music going so they didn't hear me.
Well, there is a restraining order out on you. It's going to be fine. We're working through it. It's going to be fine. The book is Never Outmatched. Please, everybody go to neveroutmatchedbook.com. Lee Pepper, I just adore you and your entire family. Best of luck to Cy. Shout out Cy. Hello, Jennifer, listening. We love you, Miles. This is a great family. This is a great man who's not only a good person, but a brilliant business marketing mind. So I cannot encourage you all enough to check this out. Lee, thanks for making time for us today.
Okay, thank you all so much, and best of luck.
Thank you,
Thank
Lynn.
you. Talk soon. So great, right? Don't you want him to be on our staff, Jim?
Oh, yeah.